I want to talk about personal learning networks and COPs, um, communities of practice, and I want to look at the learning theory angle. I want to take that angle. Um, so, in one of the articles that I think it was the Wikipedia one, or it might have been the Scott Wheeler one. Those are the two that I've read. There was mention of re-examining the existing learning theories. I'm not exactly sure what that means. It was kind of dealt with briefly, but if we just go right into it, right over here, I have something about connectivism. Connectivism refers to networks that reside outside of the learner. So that to me sounds strikingly like Vygotsky's theory of learning. Vygotsky said that learning is socially situated. So if the learning resides in the network, if the learning resides in the social circle of people, that's also outside of us, and that's a part of social constructivism. That was Vygotsky's theory of learning. And I feel very strongly about drawing it back to the theories because this is what we study as English teachers. Why are we special? Why are we different from everybody else? It's not because we have a good accent or because we have a pair of sparkling blue eyes. It's because we've actually specialized in something. We have expert knowledge on how to teach language, how to learn language. So Vygotsky's theories are important. And this idea of constructivism is similar to Vygotsky, right? So I'm just going to move on with this. The can reside. So knowledge can reside in inanimate organizations or databases. So learning can be in a personal learning network. It could be on the internet, right? That's something which is new. It might be a new idea. Up until we had access to the internet, which is 24 hours. Anything you don't know about, you can ask Google. And so you don't really have to know anything anymore because Google does it for you. If you can, but if, and to just to move on to the next thing, we're talking about know how, know where, and know why. Knowing how to get to the knowledge, knowing where the knowledge is. And that's important, I guess, if the knowledge is located in, if it resides outside of us, we got to know where it is. I also want to add this one, know why. And that's something which I'm just drawing it to another idea now, metacognitive learning. Metacognitive means that we're talking about the learning. We're talking about the cognition. You learn something, you're learning it. But if you are learning something metacognitively, you're asking, why do I have to learn reading skills like skimming and scanning? Why do I have to have a conversation in English? So people actually know the answer to this now, right? This reminds me of mobile assisted language use. The learners know that they're going to probably get more out of informal conversations than they are going to get out of doing doing gap fills in a book. So they metacognitively know that they can regulate their own learning. And so this thing about connectivism, it strikes me as something similar. What I'm trying to say is that we need to have metacognitive processes going. We're always asking ourselves, why am I doing this? Why am I asking people in my personal learning network? People know why they're learning. They're not just, learning by rote, as they say. So down to the next one, communities of practice, personal learning networks. These are social groups and leadership is decentralized. So in this way, I agree that we need a new model of learning. PLNs and COPs, they don't have a teacher, like a leader or a professor at the head of everything. There isn't someone you have to answer to. You're only answering to yourself, to your own need, to your own practice. And so this enhances communication. A classroom, so if we think about it, the teacher in the classroom, that very setup makes it the opposite to a community of practice. As long as there's someone looking over your shoulder, as long as there's someone asking you to do homework, as long as there's someone who has the authority to grill you in front of the rest of the class, it won't really be a community of practice anymore. It'll be a community of follow the leader. So just moving to the next thing, follow the leader. what I mean by follow the leader is, do we need a moderator? Do we need a leader? Yes, Lozanov would say yes. Lozanov was the one who pioneered Desuggestipedia, and he said that it is the authority figure that the learner will respond to. The best thing for you if you're out there looking for knowledge, if you're looking to learn a new language, and it's not so far away from reality. If you look around, it's called Wall Street English, and it's a private language school, and the teachers are expected to wear ties. And if you ask yourself why must a 20-something teacher who's pretty well traveled, who seems pretty cool, he dresses in a cool fashion, and he knows a lot about popular culture, what business do we have putting this guy in a tie? Maybe we're going back to the theory of Lozanov, which is that the authority figure, that tie confers some sort of authority. It says this is a teacher. And so the learner is sort of motivated by that. It's not so wrong to think that if you got somebody dressed up in a very serious looking suit, it's the same reason why newscasters wear suits and ties. It's the same reason why pilots in an airplane have a uniform, and also the flight attendants. Authority somehow puts people at ease. So that there is something to be said for, as I said, we have to look back at the things that came before. So the learning process in connectivism, you have something called pattern recognition. Actually, this strikes me, once again, if we take it back to the past, Skinner, who talked about behaviorism. So it's not such a bad thing after all, is it, to recognize patterns? We're doing it for a reason. And there's a reason for someone to repeat something over and over again, to do drills. In some way, if we make something automatic, it's not a bad thing. Is that what I'm talking about? I'm not sure. But there is such a thing as pattern recognition in the learning process of connectivism. It might not hurt us to do things to recognize patterns, to look for patterns, to recognize patterns. That can't hurt them, especially if we're talking about this new way of learning off the internet. And another thing is making more connections. When you learn something, you'd much rather have it all sort of served up on a dish for you, right? There is something to be said about modified input. So what we're doing on the net is sort of not modified input. It's all the stuff in the world that you might not want to see, and you got to sort of filter through it. Well, in the classroom, the teacher does that. The teacher kind of supplies a lot of reading, a lot of input, and the teacher does that because you need to be surrounded by people or activities that are a little bit beyond your grasp. So the expanding complexity was sort of artificially supplied by the teacher in class. The teacher knows it. You got to make it a little bit harder for the student, make it a bit out of their grasp, just a bit though. So in other words, the traditional teaching methods, including Vygotsky's theories of social learning, including the natural approach, they've always dealt with this idea of complexity. It's always been there. Asking for help. So in other words, the argument would be that we maybe don't need to deal with a new model. Maybe we do need a leader. We need a teacher in class. Of course, we're going to take this and the communities of practice and the personal learning networks, take them all together in moderation. We're going to look at the eclectic approach, right? We're going to mix it up. We're blending things together. We're not going to just stick by one or the other. So in class, when you ask someone for help, when you ask a teacher for help, that's social learning. If you're asking for help, or if someone tells you, look, just don't do that and focus on this avenue and leave that avenue alone, you're kind of being coached in your forming of connections. And you need someone to do that. Sometimes we need a coach to coach us through the connections. Being on your own and figuring out how to know and where to know and why to know is tough. It's better if we have a leader to do that for us, to help us with a part of it. This is actually just an example that would agree with the connectivist approach. I started a Facebook group and I just left it alone. It was a short story writing competition. And I came back a year later and people were posting on it like crazy. Did I have anything to do with that? No. All I did was randomly start the group. So this would be an argument that decentralized leadership enhances communication. So I don't know why I put this here. It should be on this side. But anyway, that's what I have.